For nearly 50 years, Charles Schulz's Peanuts wasn't just a comic strip. It was a window into the hearts of millions. Charlie Brown, Snoopy, Lucy, Linus, these weren't just characters on paper. They were friends, confidants, reflections of childhood triumphs and failures, the quiet joys and heartbreaks that every reader recognized. Day after day, panel after panel, Schulz poured his soul into their world, shaping American culture one strip at a time. But on one quiet evening in December 1999, everything changed. With a simple, unassuming phone call, Schulz told his syndicate what no one saw coming. "I'm done," he said. Just 3 words, and the world of Charlie Brown as we knew it would end. No fanfare. No dramatic finale. Just a man's decision to step away from the creation that had defined his life. Why did Schulz make that choice? Was it weariness? Was it health? Was it the weight of carrying nearly half a century of daily laughter, heartbreak, and imagination on his shoulders? The truth is heartbreaking, deeply human, and far more personal than the millions of fans ever realized. This is the story of the final days of Peanuts, the call that closed its chapter forever, and the creator who, in a single moment, decided that some stories must end, even when the world isn't ready to let them go. Charles Schulz was a man of quiet intensity. Born in Minneapolis in 1922, he grew up with an observant eye and a steady hand, fascinated by the way simple lines on paper could capture life's complexity. From a young age, he drew constantly, cartoons, sketches, doodles, developing a style that was deceptively simple, yet packed with emotional depth. He wasn't interested in grandeur. He wanted honesty, humor, and heart. And eventually, he found it in a boy named Charlie Brown. Peanuts began as a modest comic strip in 1950, but within months, Schulz's creation captured the nation's imagination. Charlie Brown was the underdog everyone recognized, the kid who tried, failed, fell down, yet somehow got up again. Snoopy, the imaginative beagle, became the embodiment of dreams, rebellion, and wit. Linus with his blanket, Lucy with her football. These characters were more than sketches. They were mirrors to our own struggles, insecurities, and hopes. Schulz poured himself into every line, every expression, every pause. His art was never rushed. Every panel carried intention, empathy, and sometimes quiet melancholy. For decades, Schulz worked tirelessly, producing Peanuts 6 days a week. There were no assistants, no ghost artists. Each strip was his alone. And though the world adored the whimsy, humor, and life lessons, few understood the toll it took on the man behind the pencil. He sacrificed personal time, comfort, and even health to ensure the strip never missed a beat. Friends recalled how he would wake early, drawing before breakfast, or sit late into the night refining expressions until they perfectly captured the emotion he wanted. This was more than work. It was devotion, bordering on obsession, to a world that lived only in ink on paper. And yet, for all its charm, Peanuts was deeply personal. Schulz used his characters to explore his own fears, doubts, and joys. Charlie Brown's anxieties mirrored his own insecurities. Snoopy's flights of fancy reflected his longing for freedom and imagination. Linus's wisdom captured the idealism and insight Schulz wished to express in his own life. Through his drawings, he shared a piece of himself with millions, week after week, year after year. By the late 1990s, Schulz had given the world nearly 50 years of Peanuts. Millions of readers felt as though they knew him intimately through his work. Yet behind the smile of Snoopy and the frown of Charlie Brown, Schulz was beginning to confront the reality of his own life, health challenges, age, and the inevitability of mortality. The comic strip that had brought joy to countless millions had become an immense responsibility, and it was one he could no longer ignore. Then came the night that would change everything. A phone call. 3 words. "I'm done." No one expected it. Not the syndicate executives, not the publishers, not the fans. Charles Schulz had always been reliable, consistent, and seemingly tireless. Yet in that moment, the creator decided the story had run its natural course, and that he would not let it continue without him. It was a quiet, private decision, a reflection of the man himself, humble, thoughtful, profoundly aware of life's limits. And while the world would mourn the end of Peanuts, for Schulz, it was an act of integrity, ending the strip on his own terms, with respect for both the characters and the readers who loved them. It was a quiet evening in December 1999 when Charles Schulz picked up the phone and made the call that would forever mark the end of an era. His voice, calm yet resolute, carried a weight that few could comprehend. "I'm done." To the syndicate executives on the other end, the words were shocking. Schulz had been the heartbeat of Peanuts for nearly half a century. The comic strip was more than a daily newspaper feature. It was a cultural institution, a source of comfort, humor, and reflection for generations. Millions of readers started their mornings with Charlie Brown's trials and Snoopy's antics. It was hard to imagine a world without it. And yet, Schulz had made his decision. Why did he end it so abruptly? Some say it was his health. By then, Schulz had battled colon cancer and other age-related ailments. The simple act of drawing, which had once been second nature, had become increasingly difficult. His hands trembled, his energy waned, and each strip required more focus than ever before. For a perfectionist like Schulz, compromise was not an option. He refused to allow the beloved characters to suffer from fatigue, error, or decline. Others argue it was about timing and dignity. Schulz had always controlled his work meticulously, never outsourcing, never letting anyone else draw in his stead. The decision to end Peanuts was consistent with his lifelong philosophy. He would only create while he could maintain the quality and heart the strip deserved. To him, continuing beyond his capabilities would have been a betrayal of the art, of the characters, and of the millions of readers who trusted him to deliver honesty and authenticity in every panel. The call itself was brief. "I'm done," he said. No fanfare, no dramatic goodbye, just a simple statement of fact. There was no negotiation, no pressure from publishers to continue. Schulz had always been respected as a man who put the work above all else, and this time, his integrity spoke louder than any contract or expectation. For the world, the end of Peanuts felt sudden. Newspapers published the final strips with little fanfare, yet the impact was immediate. Fans mourned Charlie Brown's quiet struggles, Snoopy's imaginative flights, and Lucy's relentless advice. Children who had grown up laughing at the antics of the Peanuts gang felt the absence immediately. Adults, who had shared these strips with their own children, felt the emptiness keenly. Yet the ending was perfect, understated, poignant, and reflective of Schulz's lifelong approach to storytelling. He didn't craft a dramatic finale because life doesn't always give one. He let the characters rest as he wished to, naturally, quietly, and with dignity. The phone call wasn't just the end of a comic strip. It was the final act of a man's devotion to his craft, a decision made on his own terms. Behind the words, there was emotion, exhaustion, and a profound understanding of closure. Schulz had poured his life into these characters, and ending the strip was a bittersweet farewell. Not just to the world, but to a personal journey that had defined him for 50 years. The call that night was not just a moment in publishing history. It was a reflection of a creator's responsibility, a reminder that some endings must be chosen by the artist, not dictated by demand, profit, or public expectation. Schulz understood that love for his work included knowing when to stop. And so, with 3 simple words, Peanuts came to a close. After the final panel of Peanuts was published, the world was left in stunned silence. Charlie Brown's struggles, Snoopy's flights of fancy, Lucy's endless advice. They were gone from newspapers, yet their absence was felt profoundly. Millions mourned the end of a strip that had accompanied their mornings, afternoons, and memories. But for Charles Schulz, the conclusion was deeply personal. For nearly 50 years, Schulz's life had been defined by deadlines, panels, and the constant hum of creativity. Every day began with pencil in hand, sketching the familiar faces of his friends on paper. He had lived in the world of Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and Linus so completely that their triumphs and failures were inseparable from his own emotions. Ending the strip meant stepping away from a world he had nurtured, a world that had shaped him as much as he had shaped it. In the months that followed, Schulz retreated quietly. He no longer had the daily routine that had dictated his life. Some expected him to feel liberated, free from the relentless schedule that had consumed him. But for a man who had drawn and written as devotion, liberation felt more like loss. The absence of routine, the silence of the drawing table, and the knowledge that the characters he loved so deeply would never again inhabit his imagination in the same structured way weighed heavily on him. Friends and family noticed a subtle shift. The humor, though still present, was quieter. The energy that had carried him through decades of work was diminished. But even in reflection, Schulz displayed remarkable grace. He understood that Peanuts had not ended because the world demanded it. It had ended because he chose it. In a sense, this made the farewell all the more poignant. The characters would live on, untainted by decline or compromise, preserved exactly as Schulz had intended. During this period, Schulz continued to engage in the arts. He painted, spent time with his family, and remained connected to the fans who adored him. Exhibits celebrated his life's work. Retrospectives allowed the public to revisit the strips. And yet, he maintained a quiet distance, protective of the personal act of creation that had defined him. Unlike some creators whose work outlives them through endless adaptation or commercialization, Schulz preserved the integrity of Peanuts, refusing to allow others to continue it without his hand guiding it. The final phone call, though brief, became a symbol of his integrity. In a world where commercial interests often dictate creative decisions, Schulz's choice was radical in its simplicity. He prioritized authenticity over obligation. He knew that continuing the strip under less than ideal circumstances would diminish the characters, betray the readers, and ultimately dishonor the work he had devoted his life to. Fans, looking back, came to appreciate the significance of those 3 words, "I'm done." They were not resignation. They were courage. They reflected a creator who understood the delicate balance between life, art, and mortality. Schulz left the world a gift, not just a comic strip, but a legacy of honesty, humor, and human insight. By ending the strip on his own terms, Schulz taught a lesson that transcended comics. Sometimes, the greatest act of love for your work is knowing when to step away. And though the world missed Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and the gang every day after, it never forgot the man who had given them life. The final days of Charles Schulz's life were a quiet reflection of the extraordinary journey he had undertaken with Peanuts. After ending the strip in December 1999, Schulz knew he had made the right choice, but it came with an emotional weight few could understand. For nearly 50 years he had lived in the world of Charlie Brown, Snoopy, Linus, Lucy, and the rest of the gang. They were companions, confidants, and extensions of his own heart. Letting them go, even intentionally, was like saying goodbye to a part of himself. The public, meanwhile, mourned deeply. Fans wrote letters, created tributes, and spoke openly about the sadness they felt at losing the comic strip that had been a daily ritual for generations. But for Schulz, the end was not just the loss of audience appreciation. It was the culmination of a lifelong dedication, a moment of both relief and sorrow. Relief, because he no longer had the enormous responsibility of producing 6 perfect strips each week. Sorrow, because he had to leave behind the universe he had carefully nurtured, the characters who had grown into cultural icons, and the comfort of routine that had guided his life. During these months, Schulz's focus turned inward. He spent time with family, cherished quiet moments, and reflected on a career that had profoundly impacted the world. He knew that by ending Peanuts on his own terms, he had preserved its integrity. No rushed storytelling, no forced continuation, just a clean, dignified conclusion that allowed the strip to live on in its purest form. His choice became a lesson in humility, respect, and the quiet courage it takes to step away from something you love. Then came February 2000. Charles Schulz passed away, less than 2 months after retiring the strip. The timing was hauntingly poignant. The man who had created a world of laughter and reflection did not outlive it by long. Yet in choosing to end Peanuts before his death, Schulz ensured that his legacy remained untarnished. The world would remember Charlie Brown, not for any decline in quality, but for the joy, wit, and humanity the strip had always delivered. Schulz's decision resonates far beyond the world of comics. It is a story of integrity, of respect for one's craft, and of knowing when to say goodbye. In a culture obsessed with longevity and production, he reminded the world that sometimes the bravest choice is to end something deliberately, to preserve its meaning rather than dilute it. Today, Peanuts endures. Reruns, merchandise, films, and countless adaptations keep the characters alive for new generations. But behind every panel is the quiet courage of a man who, in 3 simple words, defined the ultimate act of love for his work. I'm done. Charles Schulz did not just create a comic strip. He created a legacy of honesty, humor, and humanity. And in knowing when to let go, he taught the world the most important lesson of all, that endings, when chosen with integrity, can be as powerful as beginnings. His work, his characters, and his wisdom continue to inspire, reminding us that sometimes the most profound moments come not with fanfare, but in quiet, deliberate farewell.